channel. Today we're going to talk about one of Rachmaninoff's best-known preludes, the one in G minor, Op.23 No. 5. Rachmaninoff himself is a great piano virtuoso. That's why he really knows how to showcase a pianist's full range of capabilities in his compositions. This prelude is a perfect example. Even though it's short, it presents many challenges to the pianist. The opening and closing sections require a great control and mastery in chords and octaves. The middle section tests one's sensitivity and cantabile playing. In my tutorial, I will go over this piece measure by measure, share practice strategies, tips, and solutions on how to overcome these challenges. Hopefully, it will make your learning process easier and more enjoyable. Right off the bat, let's talk about the tempo. The nice thing about this prelude is that we don't need to guess the tempo. It's clearly written. Quarter note equals 108, and alla marcia means in the style of a march. But I must say, even with a specific tempo mark, when you listen to the recordings by various artists, you will still find a big variation in the tempi they chose. Some played slower and some played faster. I think for professional pianists, we should try to stay in the 100 to 108 range. And this is how it sounds at 100 beats per minute. And now let's listen to 108. Definitely has less breathing room. Personally, I found 104 is the sweet spot. Let's listen to this. So this is at 104. See, it brings out the exhilaration of the march without sounding rushed. Going beyond 108 is more of a technical show-off. It doesn't really enhance the musical characters, in my opinion. However, if you got fabulous octave skills, go ahead. It's fun as long as you can manage it. As for amateur pianists, tempo shouldn't be your top concern. Instead, work on the character of the piece. Try to achieve a good clarity in your sound and learn to play more efficiently. These should be your primary goal. Therefore, pick a tempo based on your technical ability, a speed in which you can comfortably play through to the end. Now, let's start from the beginning. This is what I usually hear when students brought in this piece for the first time. See, everything is so loud and heavy, we can't tell what the melody is and where the accompaniment is. So the first step to tackle this section is that we need to differentiate the sound of the melody from the accompanying chords. Or perhaps in this case, I should call them the motives because they are short musical ideas. If you look closely in the score, you will find the composer give us a lot of tenuto marks, those short lines and the accents. These markings indicate where the melodic notes are. So you definitely need to emphasize on these notes and play them louder than the surrounding chords. Next, let's talk about this rhythmic pattern that we have throughout the piece, the ba-ba-bum, ba-ba-bum. It's very important to master this pattern because it's an essential element of the piece. how to avoid playing them too loud and heavy. I have 3 tips. Number 1, do not play them as 3 separate notes. Instead, play them as one group. Use one motion for all 3 notes. So you want to start really close to the keys. Don't play from above because you will have a lot more resistance. See, if you're doing this. And then also the notes will be very heavy. So keep your fingers right on the keys and then just bounce them off. So it's a rebound motion. See? One more thing to remember, as you play this pattern, make sure your wrist is firm. No sloppy wrist so that you can easily make the one motion. But then, of course, remember to relax your wrist immediately after you finish the notes. Tip number 2, do not play 3 notes equally. Take it easy with the first 2 16th notes. Start softer, then go to the last note, the 8th note. This tip really goes hand in hand with my first tip. So keep your fingers really close to the keys and then just bounce them off with a small crescendo. See, all 3 notes are very clear. But please remember, no matter how soft you play, your fingertips must stay firm so that all of the notes will come out exactly together and you can create a crisp and robust sound. My last tip about this pattern is to get the right balance in these chords. For example, do you prefer to hear this? Or this? I hope you picked the first one because the balance sounds right when we bring out the top notes in the right hand. And this requires your right hand top fingers, 4 and 5, to be very strong. And at the same time, make sure your left hand doesn't overpower the right hand. So always keep it under. So make sure you spend some time working on these patterns because they're really the main drive of the piece. If you practice with these 3 tips in mind, you should be able to find the right sound. Now let's put everything together and I'll show you how to pedal. A general principle for this part is to use pedal on most of the 8th notes, like this. The beginning pedal G, then D, here you want to pedal the dotted quarter notes. B flat, G, D. And then when you get to measure 7, be aware there are 2 lines going on. The right hand, make sure you bring out the top notes. Left hand also has a bass line. So play your thumb slightly louder. You should also try to bring out the accents in both hands because they really add characters to this phrase. Give a little ritardando at the end. Pedal-wise, I used the short pedals here. I only tapped on the accented chords because I like to keep this phrase rhythmic and bouncy. So pedal here, and a little bit here. Too much pedal will sound very muddy. See? And same situation for measure 15 and 16. crescendo, but keep it short. Here. Now, let's continue from measure 10. This is basically the same as beginning. But in measure 13, everything starts to escalate. You can definitely feel more excitement is on the way. So compared to the first time, we need to make a bigger crescendo here and make sure your right-hand chords are growing as well. Then at the end of this phrase, take a breath before we enter the heroic and magnificent second page. The second page reminds me of Chopin's polonaises. For example, the A major polonaise. See, completely the same character. Both are in that strong military march style, very masculine and energetic. I will focus on measure 17 through 24 first. These 8 measures are tough. It's a passage filled with chords, octaves, and leaps. It seems there's no place nor time to rest your hands, and you just have to fly all over the keyboard non-stop. It's particularly hard for people with small hands. Imagine if we constantly stretch our hands to their maximum range. It'll put a lot of strains on our fingers and muscles. Not only is it exhausting, but also dangerous. When you play a demanding piece like this, you have to be very careful not to hurt your hands. That's why in my teaching, I always advocate for a healthy piano technique. I firmly believe there is a solution, if not more, to every technical challenge. And my students have proved it over and over again. So please don't fight with these chords and don't force yourself to do anything unnatural or awkward. There is an easier and more efficient way to tackle these problems. My solution for this section consists of 3 practice strategies. First, streamline your hand movement. You want to limit your movements as much as possible so that you can play with less effort but more comfort. For instance, at the beginning, these chords belong together, so play them as one group and then use one motion to play all of them. Okay, so the first one is really loud and strong, very solid sound. And then the other chords, you can play them slightly lighter to keep them really bouncy and rhythmic, and also to reserve your energy for later. And then use one gesture to play these 5 notes together. At the beginning, you want to slightly lift your hand up, then just use the gravity of your arm to finish the other notes. So it's a follow through. And then at the other, exactly the same. Here, I strongly recommend practicing right hand alone for these octaves. In fact, they're not all octaves. They're mixed with single notes, which makes it trickier to play. A common problem is we often miss the top notes. Either they're messy or not clear. To fix this, you can practice only the top notes, like this. Like that. By the way, don't play all the notes with pinky. You want to alternate with finger 4 and 5. For example, this is my fingering. So the first group I used all 5, but then starting in measure 18, the second group, I played 5, 4, 5, 5, 5. And the next one, 5, 4, 5, 5, 5. And then 5, 5, 4, 5, 5. It's uncomfortable if I start with 1 to 4. See, like this. That just puts my pinky off the key. But if you have bigger hands, you can definitely try 4, 5, 4, 5, like this. So measure 18 again. 4, 5, 4, 5, 5. And then 4, 5, 4, 5. And then da, 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 da. When you alternate alternate the fingering, it'll be easier to aim the notes and improve the accuracy. Once your fourth and fifth fingers get stronger, your octaves will be very powerful. One more thing about this group of 5 notes. You probably noticed the last chord in each group has an accent. So we need to emphasize it, and this leads to my second practice strategy. Remember earlier I talked about it's hard to find a place to relax your hands? Listen up. Here comes our opportunity to do it. As you finish the last chord, you want to quickly close your hands. I don't know if you can see it. It's a tiny movement. And why do we do this? Because when we expand our hands, there's a lot of tensions in our muscles. But when we close, the tension is gone. So we really do not want to stay in this hand position for long. By closing our hands, we give ourselves a break to release the tension. At first, you need to be very conscious about making these small movements. But once you develop the habit of constantly closing your hands and releasing the tension, they just happen automatically. This is particularly helpful for pianists with small hands. Even if the relaxation lasts only a split second, it helps significantly over a passage full of chords. The next strategy I want to discuss is how to improve the accuracy of the jumps. Let's look at measure 20 to 23. This is where we have several jumps in a row and our hands need to go back and forth. So the trick is that you want to touch the keys first before actually playing them. I'll do this in slow motion. So when you work down these measures, you can pause a tiny bit after each jump and make sure your fingers land on the right keys. It takes time to train our hands to remember where to go, but once the muscle memory is there, it'll be very secure. And you can also apply this method to any piece, any passage where it has big jumps. Going back to this part, you can start practicing hand separate first. It's easier to aim just one hand at a time. For example, right in the low. Then left hand. So at the beginning, play with pause. And then you want to gradually reduce the time you pause and eventually get rid of the pause. And of course, put hands together. And then without pause. To me, the hand movement in this passage also feels like a seesaw. You see, the last chord serves as a springboard which bounces my hands off to the next position, then bounces back. But then, of course, keep your hands low, close to the keys. Don't lift them up too high. This movement, if you can build this momentum in your playing and combine it with a precise landing, then this part becomes much easier. Now, when we get to this chord in measure 23, here comes another opportunity to get a quick rest. So make sure to close your hands, let go of the keys, but keep the pedal. Then we have these repeated chords. Because they're going so fast, you want to stay really close to the keys. Start the chords soft, but with firm fingertips, then play a big crescendo toward the end. chord, you want to quickly close your hands again to get a rest, then use one motion to play the following octaves. Usually when we work down the octaves, we tend to aim for the top notes, the pinky. But in this descending phrase, I found it much easier to aim for the thumb. So you can practice just thumb alone with left hand. Compared to pinky alone, it should be a lot easier. But of course, eventually you play with both notes. Now we're moving on to measure 25. Here, the opening motives come back with a thicker texture and louder dynamic. And then in measure 29 and 30, we have some interesting chords which interrupt the flow of the music and create a strong syncopation. Let's look at these chords. What are they? See, the first one is a diminished 7th chord. And next we have E flat augmented. And finally, this is the G minor chord. I suggest you take a little bit time on each chord to show the accents and the syncopated rhythm. And then, I don't know if you noticed, we actually have an ostinato in the bass, a repeated D. And then finally, why so many Ds? Well, that's the dominant of G minor. So you definitely want to bring these out in both hands. Notice the music starts to wind down, both in speed and volume, as we prepare to enter the lyrical middle section. Let's take a break here. I'm going to talk about the middle section and the rest of the piece in the second half of this tutorial. Thank you for following along, and I'll see you in the second half. Happy practicing. Bye-bye.